At the Victoria and Albert Museum in South Kensington, the exhibition of British design and British craftsmanship has been drawing thousands and booking many orders.
September 1946. 1 year after the war, an exhibition to show the world that Britain was back in business drew 20,000 visitors a day.
British people, you see, were living still in a very austere way. We'd had years of standardised furniture, standardised underclothes, all this sort of thing.
The changeover from war to peace has been illustrated in various ways. For example, war developments in Spitfires have now been applied to kitchen equipment made of improved materials.
We've got to get British manufacturers to produce well-designed goods quickly and to cheer the British public up. They were so depressed, give them something to look forward to. You know, a dream of the future, if you like.
And it seems that cyclists will shortly be scrapping all their old ideas, for the new design is very new indeed. Cycles are to have small built-in engines and radios. Still more futuristic was the electrically air-conditioned bed, cool in summer, cosy in winter, at the turn of a switch. The Queen was very interested in what is described as the miner's kitchen, a well-planned, labour-saving affair, which will probably be the envy of most people who see it. Altogether, Britain has dressed her new shop window very well, but I suppose we at home have still got to exercise patience.
For 6 years, British industry had been diverted to the war effort. Building tanks and guns for victory had wiped out the poverty and unemployment of pre-war years. Managers and workers showed a new sense of purpose that overshadowed traditional divisions.
Well, after we had just come through 4 years of war, we had to work together for our own salvation. If we wanted anything doing, we got down to it and did it, whether it was day or night. And so with that background, after the war, we realized when the war was over that to pick ourselves up off the floor again, we'd still got to keep working together. And everybody had that spirit to work together for the benefit of the country.
War is a terrible thing, but there are some pluses in almost any situation. And in war, we really were on the same side. And I think there was a bit of a carryover of that feeling into the peace.
But ex-servicemen brought a different spirit onto the shop floor, as this post-war feature film showed.
Get back to work. Hi. Who are you talking to? You, of course. Oh, we're not in the bleeding army now, you know. Might as well be a bit of good if you were. Oh, get him! 6 years in the bleeding PV Army, Dunkirk to Alamein, while he was sitting on his fanny in a reserved occupation. We know.
You weren't allowed to ask questions in the forces. You know, do what you're told. And so when you came out, you just couldn't help but say, your attitude subconsciously was, we'll show them.
In the 1945 election, Labour promised full employment and offered a radical plan for the revival of British industry.
Private enterprise has got itself absolutely tangled and frustrated by monopolies, cartels, trusts, price rings, all kinds of things that prevent the robust...
Labour were committed to public ownership. They believed that nationalisation of coal, steel, transport and utilities would spearhead a planned economic recovery.
And therefore, we have decided that it is necessary for us to come to its rescue.
But in 1945, this was not going to be easy.
I think it's true to say that you couldn't have found a year in this century, a peacetime year in this century, which was more unsuitable for introducing long-term planning than 1945, because in order to introduce long-term planning, you need a great deal of data. You need to be on a fairly even keel economically. You need to have some reserves. Everything was wrong, you see, for introducing long-term planning.
The war had left Britain with a £3.5 billion debt. On top of that, 2 days after VJ Day, America abruptly scrapped its wartime Lend-Lease aid.
The American Congress decided to cut it off absolutely overnight. We were quite unprepared for it, and we had no way to pay for our cargoes of food which were already afloat.
A top-level mission was rushed to Washington to plead for help. But more dependence on America was unpopular with Labour ministers.
Bevin didn't like the idea of borrowing the Americans at all. He used to stalk down the passage, coming in from the door, number 10, the cabinet room, saying, "Any danger of a settlement tonight?" I remember in a cheerful way. But, of course, he soon became convinced by horrible facts.
Congress is now considering, and I hope will soon approve, the financial agreements with Great Britain. These arrangements have not been made merely to support a faithful ally. They are of vital importance to our own country as a means of opening channels of world trade to American enterprise.
The new loan averted disaster, but was less than expected. Industry would be the engine of recovery. The government launched a campaign for production. Britain would trade its way out of debt.
How goes the government's production drive? Or let us say the nation's production drive, because on our willingness to work and produce depends our future as a nation.
In the long run, the only way out is by greater output of all the things that we need, and that means harder work. This is our fight. We are all in it, and we will win through.
Excuse me, Governor, but what's all this caper going on? Royalty expected?
Not exactly. We're making a film about what's going on in the factories.
Oh, really? Well, what about taking a picture of that notice over there, for a start?
Men and women wanted.
The production drive needed every available worker.
There was nobody on the dole at all. In fact, you could start at work one place, you get fed up at 10 o'clock, you could walk out and go somewhere else and start.
After playing a major part in wartime factories, women had been encouraged to return to the home. Now, the government had to persuade them back to work.
I want a nice big joint. I want a new chair.
I want lots of soldiers.
We want more everything.
Well, you really can't have them until we've produced more. And we can't produce all we want unless a lot of women come back into industry. And they're needed now.
But only a third of vacancies for women were filled. Bosses had to find other ways of mobilizing them.
A world-famous maker of electric motors retains the service of skilled women workers long after they've left the factory. He sends the work home to them.
My brother had the very bright idea of why not advertise for ex-winders who had got married, living in their homes, to see if they would undertake to do the work.
We were both expecting our children, and they said, would we take our benches, would we have our benches at home and do home winding?
Mrs. Turton, another member of the team, is just finishing the winding of her 1500th motor. Something of an achievement for a spare-time worker.
And we thought if we did it together, we'd have company to talk to instead of being by ourselves. And put the children to bed in the afternoon, you know, for an hour or two. And then when they got up, we'd knock off.
Go for a walk.
Go for a walk with the children. And then start again the day after with the motors.
Outside and inside work combined has raised the factory's output to 16,000 motors every month.
Britain had a head start on her competitors. Germany and Japan were still in ruins, and overseas markets were clamoring for goods. Britain had always supplied the world with bicycles. After a 6-year gap, demand was overwhelming, as Ken Collins found on his first morning in India.
I was awoken by banging on the door, went to the door in my pajamas, and there's a manager of the hotel requesting that I leave the hotel. He can't accept a situation where the hotel was crowded by cycle dealers wanting to see me. I looked out the door, and there, as far as the corridor went, there was possibly 200 or more.
We were gods. Every door was open for us. You had to deliver, of course. It's no use just being a smiling, pretty face. You had to deliver the goods.
We weren't struggling for orders. The orders were there. What people wanted was you to fulfill the orders. And from a printing point of view, your main headache was getting the paper. And paper was in very short supply.
The war had left the world short of materials. Suppliers had the whip hand.
And finally, when Mr. So-and-so used to come round to see you, come in, have a cup of tea. Oh, you know, he made fuss of him. Now then, what have you got? Well, now I've got this, and I've got that, and I've got the other. Well, can I have so many reams of that? Well, I'm sorry, you can't. Mind you, if you take so many reams of this other kind of paper, you can have that. And this is, they introduced this quota system.
The shortage of materials meant the government had to continue with the wartime system of controls, and through them, the power to direct industry as it wished.
The government, of course, had two priorities, I suppose. One, how to deal carefully with the scarce availability of steel in the country. And secondly, they had a greater and overriding demand for export to earn foreign currency. So they just linked the two together and said, if you want steel, you export.
The number of tons of steel sheet that Ford or Vauxhall or Morris or Austin, as it was then, would get in the next 3 months would depend on the percentage of their output they had exported in the previous 3 months. And this was, of course, obviously a very strong motive to export.
When ministers realized the export potential of the motor industry, car bosses were caught unawares.
We had virtually no exports before the war. We were a very small manufacturer, making about 10 or 11,000 high-quality luxury cars a year aimed at the home market. We did have a few exports, so they were virtually negligible.
To survive, the Rover Company needed a product to suit the times.
Here's a car that's been described as Britain's answer to the Jeep. It's called the Land Rover.
It happened quite by chance, really. One of our directors on engineering was using one or two old Willis wartime Jeeps on his farm in North Wales. And with these breaking down continually, it sprang the idea of, well, let's make one with Rover units.
To save steel, the body was made of non-rationed aluminium.
The whole idea was looked upon as a stopgap exercise. We managed to get several in the Amsterdam show. And from that, the interest of third world countries was so great that immediately the thing took off.
The government strategy worked. In the 6 years after the war, 2 million cars went abroad. As the export drive began to pay off, the government could work to its longer-term plans. In January 1947, the coal industry was nationalised. Still Britain's major energy source, coal was vital to industrial recovery.
Manpower, coal. Upon these two, the fate of industrial Britain depends. Our economy faces its most vital period since the Industrial Revolution. Here in Sheffield, coal alone supports Britain's greatest steel centre. Light industry here at Wolverhampton lives by coal. In Blackburn, all textile and engineering works depend upon coal. The great cities of Britain are virtually built upon coal.
But the industry faced an urgent problem that public ownership alone would not solve.
It was clear at the end of 45 that stocks would be so low 15 months later, as to say in February and March of 47, unless you built up the labour force very rapidly during the course of 46.
All through 1946, Douglas Jay repeated his warnings in a series of memos. He urged the recruitment of Polish ex-servicemen, but the move was blocked by the Minister of Fuel, Emanuel Shinwell.
Well, if some of the newspaper proprietors and their editors and the writers of leading articles aren't satisfied with what the miners are doing, we are short of labor, let them come and dig some coal themselves.
Miners, remembering pre-war unemployment, opposed an injection of new labor. and Shinwell sympathised.
He thought any statistics used to predict the future were highly unreliable, and therefore the estimates we made of what was going to happen in February of 1947, he regarded as just paper, whereas his mining supporters were to him a reality, and I think that was what misled him.
January 1947. 3 weeks after coal was nationalised, the worst winter of the century brought Britain to a standstill.
The heavy snowfalls interfered with rail transport. Here's one method, perhaps a trifle primitive, of clearing the line.
In London, transport difficulties make it a tougher job than ever to keep warm, with many people having to collect their own fuel from local dumps.
By February, the government had to order power cuts.
1 minute past midnight saw the beginning of the great shutdown, cutting off the power from the northwest, the Midlands and the southeast. Right through these vast producing areas, thousands of idle factories turned away whole armies of workers, not knowing how long or how short a time the hold-up would last.
There were these large boards erected inside the main entrances with a thermometer painted on. And on it were painted the stocks of coal and what production that represented, how many days they could work.
Well, we require 1,800 tonnes per week to keep this plant in full production.
And how much more coal do you need to keep it warm?
Well, we require 800 tonnes just to keep the plant warm.
The coal, in fact, was frozen into the trucks. They couldn't get it out, what coal there was. So the works were just simply closed. Everybody was sent home.
For 4 weeks, nearly 2 million people were out of work. Exports dried up. Labour's industrial plans seemed to be in jeopardy.
He was lucky and he got some coal through. There might be 2 or 3 days production. But he got 3 days on the dole and 3 days at work, which wasn't very nice.
Well, you know what's happened, don't you? Another power cut. They go on about exports and filling up the shops with the things that people want to buy, and we have hold-ups in the middle of a job because there ain't no power.
From a busy main street in London, the voice of the people answers the question of the hour.
Well, if I were Mr. Shinwell, I would resign while the going's good at the moment and give a better man a chance.
Go. I would throw sponge in and go down himself and do a couple of shifts.
I should put Polish miners into the pits in the same way as the Belgians have put Italian into theirs.
Douglas Jay's suggestion was finally taken up. 7,000 Poles were recruited.
They were really surprised to see me in uniform. I was in the rank of flight lieutenant, and I had about, well, 8 ribbons, you know, those campaign medals and Polish medals. So naturally they were surprised to see me that I wanted to go down as to join as ordinary miner.
I am here. You are there. You are there. We are here.
The Coal Board even set up a language school.
This is a man. This is a book.
One teacher asked me, pointing to door, what's that? Somebody whispered to me and back me, say door or window when he pointed to window.
I am giving this book to him. You are giving the book to him. I gave the book to him. You gave the book to him. I gave the book to you.
You gave the book to me.
There was resentment of me coming in and probably taking away a job, a future job. Not at the time, because there was plenty of work. But his son probably was in danger of not being accepted in that pit.
With a long history of unemployment and bitter struggle, miners looked forward to a new era after nationalisation.
A big change was expected from people like me, especially in the coal mining industry, because we had very bad for donkey's years, poor wages and everything. If you mentioned anything, you used to say, "What's it got to do with you?" You know, if you mentioned anything like that, "What's it got to do with you? I'm the boss."
The atmosphere wasn't quite the same this year. For the first time, the management was invited. For this was the first Durham rally since the pits were handed over to the people, and Coal Board representatives took part in the celebrations.
The Coal Board hoped that nationalisation would pave the way for higher output.
Where industrial relations were poor, the loss of output with strikes or go-slows was considerable. And therefore the cost of production was higher because of the loss of bulk output.
And for the government, coal was the showpiece of its planned industrial policy.
The whole country is watching to see how this great new organization, this new adventure, this new experiment comes out. The great experiment of socialism in a democracy depends on you.
Despite high hopes, a strike at Brimethorpe in August 1947 showed that attitudes would not change overnight. It began when a manager told Eddie Cook that his team must dig more coal for the same rate of pay.
And I looked up at him and says, "What are you trying to do?" He said, "It's not my fault, Mr. Cook. If you're satisfied with what you've read, will you please sign it?" I said, "I'm sorry, I can't sign it. Not without the consent of the unions." He said, "Well, I'm sorry, it's got to happen next week." I said, "Well, the boys will not stand for it." And that was the last time we worked for the next 5 weeks.
Meanwhile, the strike went on, and the numbers of strikers continued to increase. It's reported that 25,000 were out at some 15 pits, and that round about 150,000 tons of coal had been lost.
The Coal Board's agreement to a fact-finding inquiry, which included Eddie Cook, settled the strike. It was a departure for management.
There is no doubt about it. Many people, of course, had to turn over a new leaf. Many people didn't agree that consultation was worthwhile at all. And it took quite a long time to teach some managers how to talk with a crowd of men in a consultative meeting. This took a long time in many cases because the managers didn't feel that this was anything for the men to understand.
1947 was a year of crises for the government. Strings attached to the American loan wiped out most of Britain's dollar reserves and threatened recovery plans. In the rest of Europe, there was greater chaos. Fearing the spread of communism, the American Secretary of State, George Marshall, proposed a far-reaching program of aid to ensure economic recovery in Europe and Britain. Late in 1947, Britain also got a new Chancellor, Sir Stafford Cripps.
We need a steady pull and a long pull, with our hearts in our work, so that we get more and yet more production.
I remember Stafford Cripps coming. We fill the canteen with as many people as we can, and he addressed the gathering, and he was really stressing the fact that we'd won the war, but winning the peace was going to be a much more difficult and protracted job, and nobody was let up and so on. But his main exhortation was export.
But Cripps realised that exports alone were not enough. He won TUC support for a wage freeze. Much of British industry was struggling with worn-out machinery in antiquated conditions. To stay in profit, industry would need new methods.
Use your caps and lathes as they were meant to be used, with multiple tool setups, and get production flowing. Work out a plan for the retooling and redeployment of labor, section by section, to be carried out at weekends. And then let's get stuck into it.
One objective of Marshall Aid was an increase in European productivity. Cripps seized the chance for British industry to learn from America.
16 steelworkers representing Britain's record-breaking industry are off on a 6-week tour to study American production methods.
Well, the idea was the brainchild of Sir Stafford Cripps. A team from this country, from each industry, went on an exchange of ideas basis to America.
Drybell has worked for the same firm from boyhood. A methods engineer, he has been on a day trip to France, but never further.
The American approach to work was a revelation for Eddie Drybell.
If you went onto the shop floor, you found that each workman knew exactly what he was doing, why he was doing it, and what would happen if he didn't do it correctly.
Doug Aston was an accountant on the same team.
I walked through one of the plant's clock lobby to be confronted by a huge placard on the notice board issued by the trade union, the CIO, and this said that the greatest crime a company can commit against its employees is failure to make a profit.
The sharpest contrast of all was in the technology.
This revolutionary type of mill lifts one of the hardest jobs in the industry from the backs of men and puts it on smooth-running machinery.
I don't say they were working harder. They got better results because they were working more efficiently. They had more mechanical aids, shall we say.
Back home, Drybell put his newfound ideas to work.
When we came from America, we learned the lesson that the men are just as important as the management are in producing these castings. So we had a plan drawn, and I got a drawing, and I took it down to the men on the shop floor who were going to be interested in this, and asked them what they thought about this business and if they thought it would work all right.
But the team's findings received a mixed reception.
Some companies and some people in authority took it as it was meant, as a great aid to productivity improvement. But I'm afraid others, well, I would say some of them never even bothered to read the report. Having given a 2-hour talk to the assembled ranks in our company of seniors, middlemen, supervisors, I was in the washroom washing hands before lunch. I got my back to them and I heard this loud voice. He was a big man. Oh, he is the clever boy. This is the laddie that knows all the answers, you see.
The new ideas were up against deeply ingrained customs and practices.
I'm not going to be a party to this. I've been here 32 years, George. And this place has built up its reputation on sticking to the old customers. A wide range of agricultural implements. That's been our bread and butter for the last 60 years. A wide range. And if we're not sticking to that, then you can count me out.
So I said to Bert, so what's that machine there? Oh, he said it's been there about 5 or 6 months. I said, what does it do? He said it balances wheels in one operation. You put the wheels in, and it balances it, weighs it, checks it. So if it being moved all over the shop, there's all the operation in one go. And the firm had got it from America. I said, what's the problem? Oh, he said, well, the engineering union said they should work it. The ETU said their man should work it. The Iron and Steel Blokes Federation said their man should work it. And they couldn't agree on who should work that machine.
While private industry gave innovation a cool reception, the newly nationalized coal industry was beginning to benefit from planned investment.
Here's a complete Miko Moore ready to go to a pit. They're giving it a trial run. You can see how it shears, undercuts, loads, and pulls itself along as it works.
It'd been a lot of pits profitable in mechanisation. As I say, Grant thought we're ready for closing. We're threatened with closing in them days. And then when the mechanisation came in, everything changed.
gradually the machinery was coming in, different types of machinery. Beautiful machines, was really fast working machines, and there was no comparison with what was before.
At Grimethorpe, coal managers were beginning to get used to consultation.
We used to be asked for our ideas, as well as put ideas themselves, you know. And it used to work different. And the men were more interested because they were concerned in the running of the job.
Good news from the pits, with the Fuel Minister's announcement that for the first time in more than 7 years, 1 week's coal output has reached 4,298,700 tons. Now, as never before, the path to the future is clearly marked, and the miners are showing the way. For the splendid Christmas present they've given to the nation, and for their still greater efforts yet to come, we say, hats off to the miners of our land.
While the Labour government's plans began to bear fruit at home, Britain's goods were getting harder to sell abroad. The pound was too high against the dollar. In September 1949, after talks in America, Cripps agreed to devalue the pound to $2.80.
We have boldly created the opportunity. Let us take it. Let us maintain and not destroy the full employment that we now have.
The effects of sterling devaluation in America were quick and, let's hope, satisfactory. Newspapers carried dozens of advertisements showing the price of British imports cut by as much as 20%. Around Broadway, motor cars, one of the main selling lines, were well to the fore, and Americans began to show renewed interest. Here's hoping that the policy of smaller profits and quick returns will bear fruit in decreasing that dollar gap.
Devaluation paved the way for an end to the dollar debt, but threatened higher prices and wage rises at home. In 1950, the TUC abandoned wage restraint. When Eddie Dybell's team made their report to the Chancellor, they argued that higher output should be rewarded with better pay. But Cripps was not impressed.
So we said, well, what don't you agree with? They said, I don't agree to the men having extra money in the pay packets. I think that if a man put up a good performance on the shop floor and you found that he was doing a good job, then he should be given a medal.
Well, they keep on telling us to produce more. Turn it out. Turn it out. What I say is, turn it up.
Ben, I said, who was from the shop floor, I said, what do you think, Ben? He said, well, he wants to think about what my wife would think about that. I said, she likes to see a little bit extra in the pay packet, if she can get it. And I'm sure the people in Sheffield would soon tell him what he could do with his medal.
This is 75 quid's worth less tax.
To encourage productivity, workers at Austin who clocked in on time could enter a raffle with cash prizes.
I was very surprised because I actually didn't go to the draw, and they told me when I came back after dinner that I had come out second, and of course I couldn't believe it at first.
Well, what are you going to do with yours?
Well, I hope to put some in the bank and enjoy myself on the rest.
That's the idea. You make sure you enjoy yourself on some of it anyway.
The money at Austin's was very, very good indeed. People were queuing up to get in. They'd have their names put on waiting lists. I was, as a tradesman, was getting far more than the union rate, so there was never any problems regarding wage rises and so forth.
Your labour force are your customers, or a big part of your customers. We paid good wages. In fact, we were very much criticised as an industry by other sections of industry for overpaying.
Better pay elsewhere posed a problem for Philip Mashada.
And so you took him on, and you just got settled down nicely. We've got a good bloke here. He got to know you, you got to know him. And the next thing was, I'm very sorry, I'm leaving you. Oh, God, why? What's the matter? What's gone wrong? Well, I can get more money somewhere else.
He took his problem to the Master Printers Federation.
I made the suggestion that we should introduce a stab rate and that we shouldn't pay any more than this rate. And this man got up and he said, I've got a man working for me, and if he asked me for all the gold in Egypt, I'd give it him. That's what he actually said. He said I'd give it him.
But the long-term problems, like spiralling wages, were eclipsed by the success of Labour's policy. By 1951, the government had freed itself from martial aid and completed its nationalisation plans. Industrial production was up by half, and exports had grown by 70%. But the home market still had to go without.
Well, I've got her at last. Isn't she a beauty? And I paid my income tax, my purchase tax, my petrol tax, and my horsepower tax. Now just watch my dust. Blimey! Exports.
Productivity, export, mad. Not that it did us any good. We'd nothing to buy in the shops, because rationing didn't end till 51, 52. If there hadn't been controls at that time, I'm quite convinced that the manufacturers would have taken the easy way out. Not everyone will agree with me, but I was very much in on the ground floor at the time, and I think that without direction, the manufacturers of the day would have sold to the easiest market at the biggest profit.
In the 50s, an end to controls on trade at home gave industry an added boost. Britain was on the threshold of a long boom that would guarantee another decade of full employment and full wage packets.
I was working 12 hours, 7 days a week. Did everybody working nights as well, if they could. All I did was work in bed. Never saw my kids for about 6 months. Because the money was good, you see. If you worked a shift, you got 3 hours for that. You work an 8-hour shift, you got 11 hours, plus bonus. You got a 3-hour shift allowance. It was good money.
I think the fact that there was a great demand enabled wages to rise. We were begging people to come into industry to work, but this was a good thing, because as the wages rose, so the demand rose. There was everybody was there willing to buy more of these goods that could be produced. Looking back upon it, it was a rather happier world in some respects than the one which we enjoy today.
Next week's programme, at the same time here on 2, looks at school days and a post-war plan for a better start for children. There's a BBC book available based on the series, and you may like to know that an exhibition with the same